Ozark Season 4 Part 2 Review. The final part of the final season led us to it being the time for us to say goodbye to the birds, Ruth, the cartel, and the stunning Ozark. I was really looking forward to seeing how the final part would conclude the 5-year journey that we've been on with the family, so let's jump in and break down the entirety of the final season of the much-loved show. So, here is Ozark Season 4 Part 2 Review. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. This final part picked up directly at the end of Part 1, where we saw Ruth driving off, after leaving the birds and finding out that it was Harvey who killed Wyatt and Darlene. I thought the opening scene was absolutely stunning. Seeing the mix between present day and memories that she was reminiscing on with Wyatt, and simply seeing how much it was getting to her really translated across the screen. So much so that she had to pull over, get out of the car, and let out an immensely harrowing scream. The reverb effect on the exhale and at the point of closure of the reminiscence, accompanied by the score in this moment, was just beautiful, and really allowed it to shine. Within a short amount of time, we saw Ruth battle with herself to see if she would be able to seek revenge on Harvey, and she actually managed to do so. Not in the way that we were expecting after watching the trailer, but by getting the birds to call him round and for her to jump him unexpectedly. I was surprised to see that the birds were willing to do this so effortlessly, despite knowing that the consequences were extreme, in terms of having the cartel on their back, but also in not being able to have the route to freedom that they'd spend all of their time working towards. Once this was done, we saw Marty and Wendy have to think of some different options as to get to safety. We saw them inform Omar that Harvey was dead and he took the rap for it, allowing Marty to go to Mexico and take control of the cartel. I thought this particular episode was a good one. I liked it because I felt we got to see two different sides to Marty. Wendy had always been the driving force in their relationship, the decisions that were made, and the reason why Marty would just go along with things. And we saw this particular issue get addressed throughout this season specifically, but when he was in Mexico, we saw him step up, do what he needed to do, and it almost looked like he enjoyed an element of the power that he held. We saw him have somebody killed for putting a hit on Navarro and leaving him in a coma, but it actually turned out to be the wrong person, which we saw weighed heavily on his mind. This didn't surprise me in the slightest because Marty at his core is a good person. He's just found himself caught up in this mess. It turned out that it was Camilla, Omar's sister, who actually put the hit on Omar, as she resented him for allegedly killing her son Harvey, which Marty soon realized could cause some problems later on down the line. Wendy throughout all of this was befriending Camilla in order to get a backup plan and have her on their side. This was in order to escape the Ozarks and to try to develop the Bird Foundation to allow them to have the life that they all wanted back in Chicago. But in order to do this, they had to get Omar off the SDN list, which would allow them to pay off officers and get him free in Mexico. But due to all of the other issues that were taking place this season, it became an impossible option. They'd found themselves in a situation where Wendy's father had come to find Ben along with the PI Mel to uncover everything, and in the process persuaded Jonah and Charlotte to go and live with her father. Everything was crumbling in Wendy's eyes, and as a viewer it was interesting to see, as she was usually calm, controlled and collected and rarely let emotions out. She had the foundation not being able to go ahead as planned, the ideal life in Chicago drifting further and further away, her children being taken away, and she ended up at the point where she needed to be in a clinic for her mental health, which then led there to be the only option to instead get Omar killed with the help of his sister. I thought this was a bold move, and there were elements that I was surprised at throughout. I was surprised that none of their decisions ever came with any true consequences. Omar didn't kill Harvey, and Camilla knew that. I felt she had a relatively good life in Mexico, so her having Omar killed I don't feel would have benefited her that much, only in terms of status. We saw Marty and Wendy get to the verge of success, to then have it stripped away a countless number of times this season. But I think this is the moral of their story. Good versus evil. How bad are they in the grand scheme of things? And will they ever get what they truly want? The car crash that we saw in Season 4 I did find a little bit disappointing. I thought it would actually mean something fatal, especially considering we were first shown the clip back in Episode 1 of Part 1 in January, as we embarked on the final season, but it just turned out to be a bit pointless. It didn't need to happen. In fact, if it didn't happen, then nothing would have changed. It was almost positioned as a sign from God saying everything's going to be alright, or at least that's what Wendy said, and I didn't really buy into it. The symbolic nature of the hallucinations that Ruth had throughout the season was something that's definitely worth taking note of. I thought it was interesting to use the recurring theme of Wyatt and her family still being there in Ruth's eyes, even though that they're all dead, as a way of showing that Ruth was struggling, but just not speaking to anybody about it. And the use of the wild animals in the street in episode 1 was also a good one. It showed that she was acting like a predator hunting Harvey, which was the prey, and I thought it was extremely smart. Ruth's death was an extremely sad moment too. Her dressed in white symbolizing life, arriving at the place where she was planning new beginnings, whilst facing off to Camilla, who was dressed in black, which symbolized death, was something that was so striking on the eye. Ruth was killed in the place which is essentially a graveyard for Langmores. However, it was a place where she was building a new life. It was a haunting moment that was delivered incredibly, and it was almost written in the stars that Ruth needed to die this season. I loved how the show made us feel like the birds were on their way out after the gala, but then had Camilla deliver one of the fiercest threats that I've heard on television for a while, which essentially ruined it for them all. This was a point where I felt Marty showed who he truly was. He spent the entire show having to go along with what Wendy wanted, and being criticized by Wendy for not looking out for his family or putting them first, when in actual fact he was the only person that his family would talk to on most occasions. In this moment, he definitely did put all of them first. We knew just how much he cared about Ruth, but with Camilla threatening to hurt Jonah and Charlotte if he were to inform Ruth, it was far too great for him to risk, and he told Wendy that. I was surprised that Wendy tried to protect Ruth, considering they essentially despised each other. In the final scene where we saw Marty and Wendy tell each other that they loved one another, I thought it was extremely special. We rarely saw them express their actual feelings for one another. It got to a point where their relationship almost felt transactional and for business purposes. And we know that Wendy even said to Marty that she wouldn't be surprised if he left her when they got their normal life back. There were even occasions where I felt like Marty was thinking of killing Wendy this season. Marty went through a lot for this family, and a lot of the time it felt like Wendy didn't appreciate it. It probably would have made a great moment if that did happen, but it didn't. Right at the end, where we saw the private investigator Mel return with Ben's ashes, it was a moment that I wasn't necessarily a fan of. It was a twist that I didn't expect, granted, but I don't know if I enjoyed it that much. I liked the idea of it highlighting that they may never get their life back, and that there's always something for them to have to deal with that will likely keep them in the Ozarks. It was true to the show's nature, and I loved the way that Mel said that they don't get to live their happily ever after, and it actually came across in the show for us too, which was a great moment. But I don't know if I liked the fact that it was Jonah who almost essentially saved the day. This was very much Marty's story. He got them into this mess, and I would have loved him to have had the final last laugh amongst all of this. We saw him smirk, so maybe that's good enough. Overall, I think this final season was good. I don't think it was as good as part 1 of season 4, as that was simply phenomenal. Writers can write incredibly good cliffhangers, and that's exactly what season 4 part 1 had, but it's always so much harder to write a great ending. I get the idea of what the writers were going for in the sense of leaving it open to interpretation on if they will ever get the life that they desire in Chicago, but I would have liked some conclusiveness. Ruth's death was impactful, but almost not as emotional as what I would have imagined it to have been. I loved this character, truly learned and got to know Ruth Langmore, but I almost found the opening scene much more emotional than her death. I also believe that the car crash needed to have a fatality to have an impact as well. The birds don't deserve to have the happy ending, and whilst I get that is the point, it leaves us as the viewer a little dissatisfied because we aren't rooting against them, very much for them, but with a fatality it would have added a sense of humanity to them, and showed that they weren't these immortal figures. They're almost leaving in a better position than when they started. I very much enjoyed Ozark. I enjoyed learning about the characters, the lifestyle, the love, and the disaster. But whilst I'd give the final part a 7 out of 10, a far more devastating and fatal ending for the birds could have easily allowed it to have the 10 that the show deserves. The cast were absolutely incredible, with Jason Bateman, Julia Garner, and Laura Linney stealing this show every single episode. They match each other's energy, commitment, and devotion to the characters that they played, and it makes this show the standout that it is. I'll always look back on Ozark fondly and say it is 100% worth a watch. What did you think of the final season? Did you enjoy it? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.